Chancellor, the Vice-Chancellor will present Mr. Fred Schepisi for the award of the degree of Doctor of the University. However, before the presentation, we shall view a short video of Mr. Schepisi's outstanding achievements.
Director sets the pace. It doesn't really happen unless the director sets the pace. So you've got to keep the energy up, and everyone looks to you. You are the focus of everything that happens. And by that I don't mean inattention. It's just that there are a number of skills being employed. You know, there's up to 30 skills being employed in any one shot, and somebody has to focus all those skills to the one point, and that's really my role.
Okay, that's 5:23, take one.
My mum, used to think I would be a journalist or something like that, because I was good at English, and, she was always encouraging me to do that. And then somebody told me, if you're good at English, you can make a lot of money in advertising.
Where the flavor is. Come to Marlborough Country.
Tell him to go away, Mum. Get your gun.
This makes for a fantastic conflict, apart from anything else.
Schepisi!
I did see it as some opportunity to explore in a very good story what we do to one another culturally. I did a technique which I call, and I do it in quite a few of my films, it's called subjective objective, where 1 minute I am the person who's doing the event, the subjective, and then suddenly I'm out of it, and I'm another party looking at that person, but I'm now that party, and I'm back in, and you create a confusion of points of view, but you create, I think, the confusion of what it is like to be there at the time, where your reality slips because you're in this situation you don't know how to control. I wasn't about making expensive films. I did it as economically as you possibly could. I took no fees, all that sort of stuff. It was about what did you need to make a film of that scale.
The next time we go out to rob, I'm going to make the selections on what to rob.
Doing Barbarossa was a lot of fun. Willie Nelson's a great character.
If I say we're going to rob beehives, we can get you on a little bee swatter and you swat some bees. And if I say...
Buenos dias. You're on my road, amigos. What are you doing on my road, huh?
I don't see no sign. It says this is your road. You see a sign, farm boy? They already have a big sign up there that says this is my road.
Good evening, everyone.
Plenty,
Leonard.
Was a chance to get back to the kind of filmmaking that I was more interested in, I think.
I hear you've been having the most frightful week.
It has been, yes.
Well, don't worry. Here at least you can relax. You've met Monsieur Ong.
Indeed.
You can forget everything.
Quite a hood ornament you got there, pal. Here it comes. 3D coming at you.
I really admire your shoes.
What?
I love your shoes.
What do you mean?
And I was just thinking that as much as I really admire your shoes, and as much as I'd love to have a pair just like them, I really wouldn't want to be in your shoes at this particular time and place.
The great thing for me about Roxanne, it reminded me of all of the things I used to do when I was first making films, and
It's about the correlation between alcohol consumption and book.
Go on, get out.
University.
There's Dingo in the tent.
Did you go to university, Greg?
Dingo's got the baby!
You can drink it.
God, no, please, God, help me. The Dingo's got my baby!
What?
Who is that man down there?
He's my editor. He's keeping lookout.
I always think it's a pity that you don't get known for the films you tried to make rather than the ones you ended up making. Not that I don't like the ones I ended up making, but there are some gems I didn't get to do yet.
With the authority of the Council, I shall now confer the degree of Doctor of the University. I call upon the Vice-Chancellor to make this presentation.
Chancellor, the Council of the University has resolved to award the degree of Doctor of the University to Mr. Fred Schepisi. Frederick Allen Schepisi was born in 1939 in Melbourne and attended Assumption College, Marist Brothers Juniorate and Marcellin College. His media career began in 1955. He had left school at 15, not because of any academic shortcomings, but because he was, in his own words, impatient. Indeed, his excellence in English was one factor which propelled him towards advertising. He started as a dispatch boy, but when television reached Australia, he moved quickly into a television department where he wrote, directed and produced television advertisements. His advertisements included those for Lipton Jiggler tea bags and many for Marlboro cigarettes, and won several awards. After working for 2 advertising firms, he took over the management of the Melbourne branch of the newsreel company Cinesound. With the decline of newsreels, he later bought out the company to form his own production company, Film House, of which he was managing director until 1979 and later chair. Work in advertising and newsreel was a means towards the end of directing fictional films, and working in advertising enabled him to develop business as well as filmmaking skills. His first significant film, a contribution to an anthology film called Libido, was released in 1973. The drama of his section, The Priest, was enhanced by Schepisi's meticulous planning of camera, placement and movement. His first feature, The Devil's Playground, produced in 1976, was a semi-autobiographical film set in a seminary. Not only did he direct and script the film, he also produced it. At the Australian Film Institute Awards, it won 6 awards, including Best Film. The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith followed in 1978. Based on Thomas Keneally's novel, and produced as well as directed by Schepisi, this was at the time the most expensive film made in Australia. More significantly, it was the first of the feature film revival to indict white Australian racism and to depict Aboriginal anger sympathetically. It was also the first Australian film to be invited into the competition section of the Cannes Film Festival. At home, however, it received less critical praise than might have been expected. Schepisi later moved to Hollywood and made his first film there, Barbarossa, in 1982. A western combining comedy with adventure, the production was notable for its majestic use of landscape. 2 years later, he directed Iceman and his 1985 adaptation of David Hare's play Plenty, a film made in Britain, was his first with Meryl Streep. With Roxanne in 1987, Schepisi achieved his first hit film. This updating of Edmond Rostand's Cyrano de Bergerac cast Steve Martin in one of his most famous roles and won a Writers Guild Award. In the following year, Schepisi returned to Australia to direct Evil Angels, which he had co-scripted with Robert Caswell. Based on the renowned Azaria Chamberlain case, the Australian-British co-production starred Meryl Streep and Sam Neill, and it was honoured with 5 Australian Film Institute awards. His next film, The Russia House, 1990, involved him leading the first Western cast and crew into the newly liberalised Russia. The Russia House re-established for Schepisi a pattern familiar from his Australian films of the 1970s, namely his involvement in producing as well as directing his films. Later movies, including Mr. Baseball, 6 Degrees of Separation and IQ, were all co-produced by Schepisi. With 11 features to his credit, Fred Schepisi has achieved a very substantial reputation among both critics and producers. The New Yorker described him as, quote, the least known great director working in the mainstream American cinema, unquote. While remaining one of the more thoughtful directors in Hollywood, he has long been able to select his own projects within one of the world's most competitive film industries. Certain themes recur through his work, notably the spirited outsider, whose emergence catalyses action and reactions, amongst others. Yet probably more important are Schepisi's stylistic commitments. He subordinates style to narrative, emotion and mood. He makes full use of the cinema's visual, sound and rhythmic resources as well as dialogue. He seeks to position the viewer to appreciate both sides of dramatic conflicts and consistently uses the full-width cinemascope-screen ratio. These stylistic and narrative strengths are assisted by his having worked consistently through his career with cinematographer Ian Baker and composer Bruce Smeaton. Fred Schepisi has been hailed as the new pioneer of Australian movies, and his outstanding achievements have been recognised with 2 career awards: the 1991 Raymond Longford Award from the Australian Film Institute and the 1994 Brisbane International Film Festival's Chauvel Award. It is especially fitting that the Council of Griffith University should honour Fred Schepisi in recognition of his distinguished contributions to the art of filmmaking in Australia and overseas. Chancellor, it is with great pleasure that I present to you Frederick Allen Schepisi for admission to the degree of Doctor of the University.
I now call upon Mr. Fred Schepisi, Doctor of the University, to deliver the occasional address.
It's a big honour for someone who left school at 14, actually. But it's not as bad as you think. I had finished my leaving certificate. Almost. That's Year 11 under the new system. I don't think they call it that anymore, do they? I sort of had thought of going on and doing matriculation or 12th year, and in those days there was it was considered that I would probably have to repeat if I did that before I went to university because I would have been too young. That was my information then. I don't know that it was all that correct, but it was probably, as the Vice-Chancellor just said, I wanted to get on with it, which I did. So I went and took a colour test at a career guidance counsellor's. He asked me to see what I was suitable for. He asked me if I wanted a long test or a short test. and I said I wanted a short test and that I was interested in advertising, so he gave me a test of 3 colours, which I got right, and he said I was perfect for advertising. I don't think he was far wrong in that respect, but I wasn't perfect for advertising. In fact, I hated it and just about everything that it stood for. Even though I made a lot of money making commercials, particularly once I got into film, but I can assure you most of that money went into my first 2 feature films. In fact, when I did Devil's Playground, it took me 5 years to get the money for that. Half the money that was in it was mine. A lot of my friends and a lot of cousins. I got a lot of 44 cousins, thank God. When I finished the film, in the first place, nobody had wanted it made. In the second place, nobody wanted to show it. No distributor in Australia wanted to show the film. So I had to make as much money again as it cost me to make the film so that I could hire the cinemas to release it and put on my own advertising campaign. And that meant I had to work 2 shifts a day doing commercials while I was completing the film so that I could get that money to do it. So I guess I can't be too hard on advertising. It's kind of the year of academia for me because I think this is a great honour, and I thank you very much, particularly listening to what you people have been through and some of the degrees that came up tonight. I just think they're rather astonishing. The other reason it's a year of academia for me is I've just completed a film about Einstein, but not as you know him as a physicist or a genius, but as Cupid. This kind of had the people in Princeton a little wary of me when I first got there. Einstein is rather a religious figure, it seems. In fact, if you know anything about Einstein, he'd be rather horrified to be thought of like that in any way, shape or form. And the film is really about what is intelligence. It's about Einstein tries to get his niece, who's an academic, away from a fellow academic who's a clinical psychologist and lives in his own world and not very much in the real world. He wants her to understand that you have to live as much with your heart as with your mind. And so he tries to team up with a rather intelligent motor mechanic. I was pretty suited for this film because when I first left school, I thought that's what I was going to be. And if you knew anything about me, you would be roaring with laughter at the possibility of that. I do think there are all kinds of intelligences, but I do think to have the opportunity to study, to get away from commercial pressures, to take a time in your life where you devote it to just call it higher learning if you like, is a great opportunity that probably anyone who misses is genuinely missing out on something. Whether it's with a film school, whether it's with a university, to be free of commercial pressure, to experiment, to discover that a lot of really great people have had not only the thoughts you thought you were originating, but far greater thoughts. And it can save you an awful amount of time struggling around in your own brain. So I think it's a wonderful thing, and in many ways, I almost regret not doing it. I'm not totally regret not doing it because I did it in another way. I used to be very embarrassed for a while when people talked to me about literature or theatre and knew an enormous amount more than I did on the subject, until I realised one day that in fact I'd been doing my own study on films since the age of 15, films from all around the world, not just America, hardly America at all in fact, and that by the time I was 25 I probably had seen more films from more countries than almost anybody and knew them in detail and knew what they had to offer. And I actually consider it a failing that all schools at the moment don't teach film appreciation, particularly since there is so much leisure time in society now. I think that film, serious film, not junk film, but serious film should be taken up as a genuine course, just as serious as art or literature. And the fact that it isn't really does not speak well for those kinds of films being appreciated in the future. When you know, one of the things about working in Hollywood, which I don't do all the time, but I occasionally do, and I don't live in Hollywood, I live in New York and partly in Melbourne. And the reason I don't is because that town feeds on itself for its ideas. It's not for nothing that a great deal of your television programs are now set in television programs. And I think that's rather a shame, and try to avoid it. And it's a personal thing of mine, I think, that you should get outside your own discipline as much as you possibly can. My inspiration doesn't come from other film. It does to a certain extent, obviously, but to broaden my approach, my inspiration comes from music, from art, from theatre, and now I'm catching up on the literature. You know, I think you need to constantly be studying things right outside your own discipline, to not get set to find out what, particularly if you're in an area where you're going to have to deal with the world or present the world in some way, you better make sure you know something about it, something way outside of any narrow specialty that you may have selected as your own personal area. In mine, it's film, but to do it well, I believe you've really got to look beyond the barriers of film. You know, unfortunately, that doesn't really happen a lot in commercial film. When I was doing this, I was setting up the interim of the course for directing at the film school, the Australian Film and Television School, when it was called the Interim Film and Television School. And much to the horror of the students, I was bringing dentists along to give lectures, and they couldn't quite see what this had to do with film. I also brought along architects and lawyers, and given more time I probably would have brought carpenters as well. And the reason for that was that I believe that people get into their specialties and then they somehow think that they've got some knowledge or some privileges way beyond other people, and that theirs are the only disciplines that matter. Whereas in actual fact, I've met many dentists who have a far more creative approach to their work than I might have had at that time. The processes that they go through, whether it's, you know, for some surgery to the roof of the mouth, some painless way of, you know, giving you root canal. They go through quite a creative process, believe it or not, and it's remarkably similar to the one that writers and directors often go through. And I think to make people realise that as well as expose them to other aspects of life, not only makes them feel less superior, but I think makes them ultimately better at what they do. And it allows you to incorporate other perspectives. I think learning is really what I'm talking about, and I'm constantly learning, and I think the day I stop learning, I'm really going to be finished. I'll either start repeating myself or just be finished. I'll run out of ideas. But having said all that, you know, unfortunately, the learning will help you choose, in my case, subjects, and may help you develop some shortcuts. But what I've found is that halfway through any film I'm doing, I've already learnt an enormous amount that I would like to be able to apply to that film, and everything I'm doing is now, to my mind, old hat, And the sadness is I can't apply it to that film because I would destroy its style and its discipline, and it would end up being a mishmash. So I have to wait until the next film before I can apply that knowledge. And then, of course, when you get the next film, that knowledge isn't relevant because you're on a completely different subject. The only thing I have learnt, though, is that despite all the exigencies, bad behaviour from actors, I'm sure you've all heard about that, you know, filming films like The Iceman when you're filming in minus 42 degrees centigrade, these things can slow things down and make things exceptionally difficult. And the one thing I have learned is that it'll all come out in the end, to not panic, to trust what you're doing, to trust things to take their time, and to trust above all in yourself and the knowledge that you've accumulated thus far. Trust in yourself and you will make it work. And recently I've been back to doing some original writing with great trepidation, despite the experience that I have now. I really doubted whether I was quite capable of doing something completely original again, and I picked up on that learning and decided to just trust that maybe with the experience and with my own abilities that it would come out, and that's the way that it's been working, which is a rather long-winded way of saying keep on learning, believe in the knowledge you have, add to it as often as you can, from as broad a number of spectrums as you can. This shouldn't be the end of it. And then trust it, and trust yourself and believe in yourself. Thank you very much.